Join me today at the wheel of an E39. Yes, we've driven these BMWs a few times before, but never with a straight six, only with a V8. There is a couple of subtle differences under the skin, so let's see what the differences really are. And this car is currently for sale at Stone Cold Classics at Rootham in Kent. If you like the look of this, then head over to their website where they've got this and other interesting cars for sale. And if you like reviews like this, then hit their subscribe button, because there are weekly uploads of interesting cars being reviewed and looked at, well, every week. Hit the subscribe, hit the bell notification. Now on with the review. Hello, welcome to Furious Driving, and today we're looking at possibly one of the greatest saloons ever built. And I know it's a car we've visited previously, but as it's such a good car, let's look at a different variation we've not looked at before. This is the E39. From 1995 until 2004, BMW built this, the 5th generation 5 Series, which is arguably the best BMW ever, and also arguably one of the greatest saloons ever built as well. There are so many reasons this is a good car. I won't go into them all right now because we've covered two of these cars previously. But those have both been V8s, a 540 and an M5. We've never touched on the cooking models, which is what basically everyone normal would have driven back when these were new. So today we're taking out a 6-cylinder, a 523i, a lowly petrol engine. Let's see if it's as good as the big engines make out. But before we get going, let's just take a moment to marvel in this, well, serene, understated beauty. This particular car is painted in aspen silver, which is a really quite unusual lilac silver colour. I don't think I've ever seen one quite like this before, and it's complemented by not only the quite small 15-inch turbine alloys, but also the full-on ginger caters. This thing is, wow, proper 1990s spec. It is an R plate after all, so we are heading into the tail end of the 90s, peak 90s you might say. I think when I spoke about the 540, I spoke in great length and detail about the design, the launch of the E39 as a whole, so I'll link that video up here in a card right now, and also on the tail end of this video right now, and also in the description below. So if you want to just pause this, open a second window and watch that video, you can get all about the design, the launch, that kind of stuff. Let's just focus on this one, the 523 for today. Okay, so let's pop the bonnet and have a look under here. So, obviously being the cooking model, we are down 2 cylinders and quite a lot of horsepower, but this is still one of the all-time greats. The BMW straight six petrols are really nothing to criticise. They're one of the all-time iconic, fantastic, well, bulletproof engines. In terms of reliability, if you want a nice reliable BMW, you go for the 6-cylinder petrol. If you want a great noise, you also go for the straight six petrol, because these things have a growl all of their own. In this particular car, this is the M52 straight six. There were two variants of it. There was the B25 initially, and then later on the TUB25, which BMW nerds will just tell you at length what the differences are. But as far as we're concerned, it's an M52 and we're happy with that. And what that means is, apart from a great noise and good reliability, it's got 168 horsepower and 245 Newton meters of torque, which is all good. Now the chances are this was going to be some kind of company car, so in terms of the car park company key fob wars, this will have done you proud. Now before we climb in, let's take a quick look at the seat controls. Nothing electric in this car, all manual, and also how unusual they are as well. This front one does not roll the seat forwards and backwards as you expect it does. It tilts it. This catches out everyone who climbs into a 5 Series from the last 20 years, 30 years. Every time they get in, your forwards backwards is that one just there, and these ones are for height and recline. Now, climbing into the 523, we do have all of the 5 Series E39 goodness. It does still feel like it is hewn from a chunk of granite that was in turn hewn from a chunk of lead. Everything is just so solid and just real feeling. You sit in this car and you actually don't feel real yourself anymore. The car feels just so substantial. You feel like you're the invented, made up thing, and the car is the only real thing around you. Now, despite being the lowly 523, we still have all of the good stuff that makes the more expensive V8 engine cars just as much an E39 as this is. So over on the door we have got this lovely soft touch leather here around the door handle, which is diagonally stitched, slightly emulating in fact the M stripe logo, so just little diagonal thingies going on there, so there's always just a hint of the sportiness. Of course we've got the electric windows, electric mirrors, big solid door handle and carpet lined door pocket. This is all still very much the same as the big V8s. Lots of lovely wood in the door. This is all beautiful, incredibly shiny. This looks factory fresh, it really does. And of course door vents, double door speakers. Over into the dashboard itself we have got these dials and instrument binnacle, which again the M5 doesn't really feel that special when you look at the dials because you've got a logo and little else, but everything else around it is very much the same stock fare. So, oh, interesting buzzer. That lights on buzzer is quite aggressive. So we've got our light switches to the right and the left of the wheel. Now the wheel itself, it does feel quite 1980s-ish in its size and its layout. It does feel lovely in your hand. It's quite a slim leather wheel, so it's not too thick a rim to grasp around. Today's wheels have become incredibly chunky, so if you've got small hands you can barely get your hand around it. These things though fit nicely in your grip. And we do have a few controls as well. Despite being a 1990s car, this is the early days of steering wheel controls. I've said this thing before, we've got tuning and volume. Our trip computer and cruise is all on here, and of course we've got the horn. Puppy! Nice. Then up top we've got a magnificent T-shelf. I've said this before about our 5 Series, is that the T-shelf area is really something they learned from their time owning Rover. When they bought that company, they learned everything there was to know about putting a T-shelf in a car. So if you want sandwiches, tea, whatever you want to snack up on, it goes up there quite happily. Moving down, big air vents, an airbag, and more of this beautiful timber. This car has only got about 20,000 miles on it, so everything does still feel new and fresh. And there's this unusual thing that BMW did where they would hide half of the radio behind a wooden trim. So you've got your screen, your buttons for the radio, the FM bit down here. If you want your cassette or your CD, that was tucked in under here. This was a BMW Business RDS. I never really did get the business name. It doesn't make a lot of sense that when they're calling their radio business devices. Maybe it meant it was easier to put it through on expenses if you bought a new one. Beneath that we've got dual zone climate, which is nice. We've got the absolutely rubbish cup holders, which are a staple of every E39. BMW never really got the hang of cup holders. And we do have this little fold out lighter socket, and this though isn't automatic, so we've got this wooden topped gear shifter, which is does look nice with a bit of leather on the side, leather underneath, wooden bit on top. Just matches blending lovelily, is that all a word? I don't think it is, into this wooden surround down here. If you're looking for somewhere to put your sweetie wrappers, then this is very Thunderbirds. That rolls back, that lifts up. Thunderbird 2 is go and ready to accept your Chubba Chups wrapper. Behind that we've got a little tiny concealed roller desk, losing things in there, and a very remarkably shallow, I think I've commented on this before, how ridiculously shallow this rubberized area is. Now something you notice about the 523, which I need to go and check back on the videos on the 540 and the M-Class, is how flat these seats are. They're basically like a large living room armchair. They're very much for comfort, not holding you in place. You sit on them rather than in them. Now looking around this car, something you may not have noticed just yet is how pale blue it is. Everything is, well, like the outside of the car is very pale, but with a hint of lilac. This is all very pale blue-grey. It's quite a relaxing car to be in. Right, let's get this thing on the road and see what the real differences are under the skin. I know, you fire it up and you listen to that sound. That's a creamy, dreamy almost sound. It's rather wonderful. It's almost a whine, which becomes something of a growl from that V6. Is a very different sound and different power delivery as well from the V8. The thing about the straight 6 compared to the V8 is the way it revs. It's well, inline 6s and 4s do tend to rev more rapidly than V motors. So although you've not got the capacity and so much of the power, what power there is more instantaneous. Now, the car is fundamentally the same. It was designed by Joji Nagashima, in 1992, just as Chris Bangle started as chief of design at BMW. So this is all ahead of the Bangle butt flame edge design. This is very much, well, it's a very sophisticated design which follows on from the 80s to 90s, clean, smooth lines. It's, well, a product of its time and the time before, as all things are. Under the skin though, things were very, very advanced. Multi-link Z-axle at the back, McPherson struts at the front, and this was the first BMW to use an all aluminium front substructure. So most of the suspension, the front subframe, that's all aluminium, particularly on these ones. It saved 21 kilos in the front suspension by doing all of that. it might not have the explosive acceleration of the V8, but it is rapid off the mark still nonetheless, and it feels quick as well. And like all E39s, it does have that same heavy feeling. The steering is quite heavy, the pedals are quite heavy. This one doesn't feel quite as heavy as the other ones though. And that is partly because the steering is actually a completely different system. In order to make the V8 engines fit around the steering system, the V8s were all given a recirculating ball system, whereas the straight sixes and the diesels all got rack and pinion. So the steering does actually feel a bit lighter and a bit sharper than the V8s. This is perhaps a little bit like the BMW IS back in the E30 days, when the smaller engine 1.8 was actually the better one to drive than the bigger engines. The front suspension is double jointed multi-link with McPherson struts. Now I remind you, a while ago this is the corner I nearly lost a Capri on at about 15 miles an hour. That was happy to take a bit of throttle midway through the corner and didn't bat an eyelid about it. These are so well sorted. That multi-link rear does give you effortless control. This is of course back from when BMWs called themselves the ultimate driving machine. If you watch Hoovie's Garage, he's spoken at length about how the early noughties cars really were the pinnacle of this, and the modern cars have kind of gone off the boil and gone about, well, all about how many gadgets they can cram in rather than about how good the car is to drive. These things were good to drive. I know I say these are heavy behind the wheel, but I don't say that as a criticism. Now, interestingly, there was quite a lot of other innovation in this car, that BMW were going to make this a very, very big deal as the new generation of 5 Series. I believe it's the first car to have an aluminium front structure under a diesel engine, a 4-cylinder diesel anyway, and it's the first car to have side curtain airbags, I think. I know you'll tell me if I'm wrong. Now this thing has got the 2494cc straight six in it, which is obviously 2.5 litres, badged as a 523 because of, you know, hierarchies of the badges on the boot and all that kind of thing. Now with the automatic gearbox, it's a little slower than the manual. There were 2 gearboxes offered. There was the 5-speed manual and this, the 5-speed auto. The manual will do 0 to 60 in about 8.5 seconds, but the automatic is about 1.2 seconds slower to the magic 60 figure. Either way, they both do about 140 miles an hour. This will do 139, the manual 141. But the gearbox isn't what we're talking about right now. Really, it's the steering that makes a difference. The lighter engine, the tighter steering, it does mean this thing is easier to chuck around, and these things are just such good cars to chuck around. That steering is more responsive, there's more feel, more feedback. It is a big car, but it's a big car that feels like you can drive it like a sports car. It really is a wonderful piece of engineering. This is why I always say the E39 is the best saloon ever, because it's a fantastic family sedan, built better than almost anything on the planet, but handles like a giant MX-5. Now the M5 is of course the poster child, the one everyone lusts after, but really, I think the 523 might be the hidden secret one. Maybe I should go and find a 528 manual. That might be the best one of all. If you need to make a brisk getaway, you really can do it in this car. It's just so smooth. And I know I'm not a huge automatic fan because I don't feel like I'm involved in the drive quite so much, but this is very, very smooth indeed. And in the E39s, you are so connected to the steering, you can almost forgive it having an automatic. Almost. I say almost. I know some people seem to like them. I'm still yet to be converted. I feel like I should be filling the time by telling you a bit more about this car, but honestly, it's just such a nice thing to drive. I'm just enjoying driving it right now. So I think the unexpected takeaway from this video is that if you want the best driving E39, don't go for an M5, go for a straight six, one of the small engines. Which does of course have the other advantage that you can be absolutely thrashing it and not be going anywhere near as fast. So you'll get to those lower speeds quicker, and then not have to keep on going to get the best out of the engine. you can be enjoying that peak power at a lower speed, so more legally, which is a good thing. Well, thanks for joining me today at the wheel of this yet another E39. I know I've driven 2 of them before on this channel, but I'm not going to apologise. I like them a lot. And the thing is, well, the 6-cylinder I do think feels like a more interesting car to drive. It's a little bit more happy to respond to the throttle, and the steering is just a little bit more light and more accurate as well. So perhaps by going down an engine size or 2, we've found the best E39. Who knows? Well, thanks as always for watching, and please do, as always, click like and subscribe and join me again next time driving something completely different.